So in this video, we will be discussing phosphorus, a mineral that with calcium and vitamin D also plays a role in bone. Phosphorus with calcium is a primary component of hydroxyapatite, which makes up the structural framework of bone. Additionally, we'll see that phosphorus is a component of many key compounds in the body, including ATP, DNA and RNA, creatine phosphate, UTP, cyclic AMP, phosphoproteins, and the phospholipid bilayer. Here we see food sources containing phosphorus. So we see that meat, dairy are going to be key sources of phosphorus. However, we also see phosphorus found in eggs and also soft drinks. We see here the characteristics of the digestion of phosphorus. So when consumed in food products, phosphorus exists either in its free form, so inorganic, or bound to organic compounds. So the phosphorus in food that is bound to organic compounds must be hydrolyzed to free the phosphate and allow its existence in the inorganic free form. Most of phosphorus is going to be absorbed as the inorganic form. So that's going to be the goal of digestion, is to hydrolyze any phosphorus that is bound to organic compounds to allow it to be in the free inorganic form. There are going to be two mechanisms of absorption. So we see here the first being a saturable carrier-mediated process. It's sodium dependent and enhanced by calcitriol. So again, this is the active form of vitamin D. So this is actually going to be similar to calcitriol's effect on calcium. We saw that calcitriol increases the absorption of calcium. We see it also increases the absorption of phosphorus through this saturable carrier-mediated mode. We also see that phosphorus can be absorbed through this concentration-dependent facilitated diffusion, and this is actually the primary mode or mechanism of absorption. We see factors influencing absorption of phosphorus being vitamin D, so we already saw that calcitriol increases phosphorus absorption, but we also see that phytic acid, magnesium, and calcium will inhibit or decreases its absorption. So these will actually bind to phosphorus prior to absorption. So it will bind to phosphorus in the lumen of the small intestine, promoting its excretion in feces. So here we see a diagram related to the intake and digestion of phosphorus, the absorption of phosphorus, and then the forms in which it is transported in circulation. So we first here see that when consumed and bound to an organic compound, that phosphorus consumed in a bound form will need to be hydrolyzed to yield that free inorganic phosphate. So after these activity of the enzymes such as these phospholipases, then we have the freeing of the phosphate and in availability in the inorganic form. So there are different fates now of this inorganic phosphate. So we see primarily it will be absorbed through this concentration-dependent diffusion process. It can also be absorbed through the carrier-mediated mode. So this is an active transport process. However, this phosphorus can also be exposed to different binders. So we saw phytic acid, also magnesium and calcium primarily can bind to the phosphorus, and then that will decrease its bioavailability and it will actually be excreted in the feces primarily. After the phosphorus enters through the brush border membrane and is within the enterocyte, it will then exit through the basolateral membrane and then be circulating in the bloodstream. So we see it's in the portal blood, and it will be circulating in various forms. So we see that phosphorus in the blood can be circulating either free, so we see it circulating in the free form. It can be complex to organic compounds and found as organic phosphate, or it can be complex with other minerals such as calcium, magnesium, or sodium. So we see here as it relates to the transport and storage of phosphorus that it's going to primarily be transported in the blood as free phosphorus, so that's the inorganic free form, or complex to an organic compound. We see that the storage of phosphorus is going to occur primarily in the bone, so we see 85% of the body's phosphorus will be in bone, and this is also similar to calcium. We saw that the majority of body calcium is stored in bone. Also, we see some phosphorus within the muscle and also in the blood and other body fluids. Now we'll discuss the functions and mechanisms of action of phosphorus. So, like calcium, phosphorus plays a role in bone mineralization and found as a component of hydroxyapatite in bone. So phosphorus and calcium primarily are the minerals making up this hydroxyapatite found in bone, and so it's going to be working with calcium in this process. We see the different compounds affecting the entry of phosphorus in bone, or the resorption or demineralization of bone, then freeing phosphorus into circulation. So it's interesting that the activity of these compounds, the calcitonin, PTH, and calcitriol, the effect of these on phosphorus is very similar to what we saw as it relates to calcium. So we see that calcitonin promotes the integration of phosphorus in bone. So like we saw with calcium, when serum phosphorus levels get too high, then calcitonin activity increases, promoting the integration of phosphorus from the blood into the bone. So again, that's similar to what we saw with calcium. We see that PTH and calcitriol working with PTH promotes the resorption or demineralization of bone, then freeing phosphorus into circulation. And then we also see that calcitriol, as we saw before in a previous slide, that it increases the absorption of phosphorus. So phosphorus has some unique roles, so this is not going to be similar to what we saw with calcium. So some unique roles of phosphorus we see is its component in key structures in the body. So key structures as it relates to energy storage and transfer, but also it plays a role in these additional key structures, DNA and RNA. So for the structures as it relates to energy storage and transfer, we see that phosphorus is a component of the phosphate group of ATP. It's a component of the phosphate group in creatine phosphate. It's a component of the phosphate group in UTP, involved with the formation of UDP glucose, which was a compound involved in glycogenesis. Also, we see it's a component of intracellular second messengers such as cyclic AMP and protein kinases. So we see here the phosphorus, which is a component of the phosphate groups of DNA, also of RNA. We see phosphorus as a component of the phosphate groups of ATP and also creatine phosphate. Phosphorus also plays structural roles in different phosphoproteins, the phospholipid bilayer, and plays a role additionally in acid-base balance and oxygen availability. So we see here the RDA for phosphorus is 700 milligrams per day. Deficiency of phosphorus is low, so it's fairly uncommon to have deficient body stores of phosphorus. We see the tolerable upper intake level of phosphorus being 4 grams in most life stages and age groups. However, the elderly, the UL would be 3 grams per day.